Welcome to Lessons That Last, where a researcher and a teacher talk about what it means to make a lasting impact on students' lives. They unpack the stories former students shared about their memorable teachers and discuss how we can all make a greater impact on the people in our lives. Here's Julie and Laura.
Hello and welcome to the Lessons That Last podcast. I'm Julie Hassan, professor, researcher, and with me is my almost back to school teacher friend,
Laura Estes Swilly. I am raring to go, ready to be a great teacher this year.
So we are pre-back to school recording this, but by the time our listeners hear it, lots of them will be back to school. I know in Florida, they're headed back soon. In North Carolina, they've got a few more weeks, most places. I talked to a teacher from New York yesterday. They don't go back till after Labor Day.
I know, but our friend who lives in South Carolina, her student started last week.
What? We've got to figure this out.
It's a lot. It's early.
I mean, when is back to school? Yes. And then, so I'm guessing either New York gets out really late or they have some different breaks than we have.
No, they do. They get out later. I know that I've seen like graduations happening in the Northeast in late June. So I think they just get out later.
In Florida, we said, you know what we're going to do at the peak of the summer heat?
Yes.
We're all going to go out to bus duty.
Mm-hmm. We're going to be in classrooms where the air doesn't work. We're ready.
We're ready. I mean, you've been heading back to school with a broken air conditioner for a couple decades now.
Yeah.
So you know how to dress in the layers and get the really good deodorant.
I do. I was in school for, I think, 2 days last week. And on Friday night, like I had a scratchy throat and my eyes were burning. And today I saw these dark circles under my eyes that are usually a sign that I'm getting a sinus infection. And that's 2 days in the building because the building is locked up and air is off all summer long. Well, guess what grows in a hot, moist space? Well, that would be mold. And we always get sick when we go back to school.
Yeah, between like needing to air out our spaces and all suddenly being surrounded by a bunch of people, and then the kids come, and plus you're physically a little worn down. Like it's the perfect storm. So friends, take your vitamin C.
Yes.
Get your sleep.
Load up.
Whatever it is that keeps you feeling on the other side of all that sniffling and coughing and achy. Yeah.
And I think right before school starts is such a busy time for teachers. Before we go back, we want to get everything done and we're trying to prepare our kids. And, I think that we would be much better served to take that last week before pre-planning or those last few days to really relax, really get a little extra rest, some vitamin D, drink a lot of water, float in a pool, that kind of thing.
I've been working on not having to have everything perfect and everything done like now.
Yes.
I'm teaching a new class next semester and I'm like, I need to have the whole, like my art canvas, everything uploaded, everything scheduled, the whole course map fleshed out. Like we're not finishing till December. I don't need, so I'm trying to tell myself like one step at a time, friend. Like
I love that. I love that you're doing that for yourself because you really are such an achiever and you work so hard and you want everything to be just right, which is why you're so great at what you do. But it's also a lot of pressure, Julie. So I'm glad you're kind of encouraging yourself to work a little more slowly.
And I'm not even sure it's best practice, like if I'm so planned before students even come into my class, then how responsive can I be to what comes up and what they need and what feels right? And I think that about us, even with our classrooms in elementary, if it's so perfectly done and everything's finished when kids come, then what part do they play in making any of those decisions or feeling like they have any ownership of that?
I agree. I think I sometimes take a lot of flack, even from myself, about my methods of planning, because a lot of times it's very open-ended. I know the things we want to achieve and I know how we're going to do them, but I have no idea how long they're going to take. And I'm willing to take an extra day or two because we need it. To me, that's being responsive. To other people, like they can't live that way. But that's my nature. So I guess I'm lucky, and my kids are maybe lucky because sometimes we finish early because we're done with that concept or that skill or whatever. And other times we need extra time.
And the best lesson plans that have ever sort of come to me have come in the morning shower, and I've changed everything.
I actually said that recently to a group of teachers. A lot of times my really great lesson plans come as I'm walking through the building to get to my classroom, and they were all like, oh, because that feels stressful.
But it's not like you don't have a plan.
Right.
You just the pieces come together, right?
Absolutely.
Or you think, no, if I just started it this way, that would really engage them better.
I agree. I have had those moments where I know what we're doing. Here it is. It's this. And as I start to write something on the board, I'm like, you know what we should do with this? And boom, magic. I think it's magic. I don't know what my students thought, but it's when I raise my hand to write it on the board before the students get there. You got to take it when it comes. And so you're right. Being over planned sometimes takes away your flexibility.
I mean, any creative art comes when inspiration comes, right? You can't force an inspired thought. And teaching in so many ways is an art. And when that inspiration comes, it may come in the shower, it may come on the drive, it may come walking down the hall, and then you have to grab your pen and your pad of paper if you're me, or if you're more techie, maybe your voice recorder on your phone.
Yes, voice notes.
Capture that. We had a high school teacher who was famous for that. And I don't know if you know that is how she rolled. But Nancy Kahn.
Really?
Who was she was food and nutrition, right? Which you can't really put together on the fly.
That's what I was just thinking. How can you do that last minute?
She would be running to the grocery at 6 a.m, like inspired about something. So my mom, who was her teacher bestie and her next door classroom neighbor for years and years, would tell these stories about Nancy just suddenly saying, I know.
I love that. I love that
too. I thought about both of them the other day. I was walking through a school and I stopped outside the home ec door, and this teacher had this bulletin board, and it was called Marvelous Mistakes. And when they did cooking or projects, their job was to write on a sticky note a mistake they made and then what they learned from it.
Love that.
It was so brilliant. And they had made chocolate cake with mint chocolate icing. And so it was things like, don't turn the beater on when there's still batter on them. Or one of them said, don't use too much mint because too much mint is just too much. It was precious. And I thought, I was going to teach my students, and I had to tell them about that. And then I thought, what if we did that with our teachers who were trying a new strategy or a new curriculum? What didn't go well, but what did we learn from it?
I love that.
Or if you're a science teacher and you're doing a lab, or you're a writing teacher and, there's an issue in their where did you hit the bump?
Right.
But then what did you learn from it?
What did you learn? And that's the metacognitive side of learning that we need to do, and we need them to do. What did I learn from that mistake? And it makes mistakes so much less scary as well. You have the kids who feel like they have to be perfect all the time, and when they make a mistake, they get very frustrated.
Right. It's like me and my lesson plan, right? And then things don't go according to plan.
Right. And how great if we can give them a way to see that as a gift. I made a mistake, but the gift was the learning.
Yeah. And next time I'm going to be so much better for having made that mistake. So there's a little something for all of you heading.
I'm making a note right now.
See if you can adapt that. And then I had to wonder, did she think about that at 6 o'clock in the morning before she did that lesson?
Yes, probably. Or she got it like most of us. She borrowed, stole, and made it her own from someone she met somewhere or worked next door to somewhere at some point.
Well, I took a picture of it and I share it with absolutely everybody now. So
I love it. Send me a picture of that.
I definitely will.
That we could incorporate that really in a really cool way with our instructional leadership team, which works with training and school goals and bringing teachers into looking at their mistakes as springboards for learning.
I love that. I spoke to about 100 beginning teachers from our Western North Carolina region on Thursday, and I did share that with them, that photo, and we talked about how can we take this and tweak it for our content, but also how can we use it. I mean, I had to break it to them. You're going to make some mistakes.
Yeah, it's sad. That's a sad story to tell a new teacher.
Yeah. But so are the very experienced teachers down the hall from you. We're just all going to mess it up sometimes, you know?
Yeah, that's true.
But speaking of being proactive, this story is about a really proactive, lovely teacher. And I'm
my gosh, yes,
excited to share this one today. But before we do, I want to ask you, how do you help your students learn how to say your name correctly?
Well, that's a challenge because most of the staff in my school for about 20 years has said it wrong. Our new principal learned how to say my last name correctly, which is Estes. But prior to him, everyone called me Estes. And it doesn't matter how many times you say, my name's Miss Estes, they would call me Estes. And so with the kids, it kind of helped them learn how to say it properly because they would get upset by all the people who said it incorrectly, right? Mm-hmm. And so it hit their ear wrong, and that was part of them learning how to say it properly. I think I say it often enough, and they hear it often enough. And I've been teaching in the same school for 24 years. I feel like
you have their siblings.
Yes. Half of them come in knowing how to say my name.
Right.
And then they also model it for each other because they know how to say my name. But I think it's hard for teachers with unusual names. Mm-hmm. I worked with a teacher my first year. Her last name was a complicated name, and it was something along the lines of Stanishevsky. But it was not spelled as simply as I just said it.
Had a lot of consonants.
Lots of consonants. And so she just was like, call me Miss S. Just call me Miss S. And it always kind of made me feel badly that she didn't push them to learn it because she deserved to have her name properly said and not be, truncated into something else.
Yeah. I married into a name that is constantly mispronounced. Yes. So yes, I was a Schmidt, which is a very common German name and easy. Like there is just no other way to say it. Schmidt is Schmidt. Or Schmitty, as our high school friends like to say. And then I married Brian Hassan, who has been called Hasten, Hansen, Hassan.
Hassan is a big one.
All of the things. So I realized, I think teaching, probably when I was still teaching second grade, if you tell the kids what it rhymes with, then they're good. So I would say Hassan, it rhymes with fasten. Fasten your seatbelt. It's going to be such an exciting year, which is so cheesy, but it worked, right? So they would correct the adults in our school too, and he would say Hassan or Hasten or Hansen. They'd be like, Hassan, it rhymes with fasten.
Right. And then they teach their parents, because when they go home and talk about you, right, the parents never came in and said your name wrong, probably because their kids had already taught them by speaking about you. And I was thinking while you were talking about Brian's last name, my dad always calls you Hassan. Okay, it's been a long time. You should have learned this. And I mean, some people just don't want to learn, Julie,
Right.
and we can't.
I have to say, it doesn't bother me,
No.
and I don't always correct people, but it bothers Brian.
Sure. Yeah. Our last name is Swilly, and right, I don't know, 3 miles from the school is a road called Swilly Road.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of people in this area named Swilly went in and out of Durant. And it always surprises me when someone can't figure out how to say our name.
What do they say?
The most common is Swiley and Sweely. Sweely.
That's why we've got to go back to teaching phonics.
I know. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Sweely and Swiley. And I always, because I'm an English teacher, can't help it, in my mind, or when I say to Jason later, how could it be Swiley? There are 2 L's. Come on.
The double consonant.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. And, as someone who doesn't always correct people, it's still nice when people say my name correctly, especially if I've introduced myself or there's no reason for them not to know how, like your colleagues should be careful enough and respectful enough to, once they've heard it, right, say it. And I think about kids who have unusual names.
Yes.
And do we make the effort and understand the importance of saying their names correctly? Which leads us to this story. And you and I had to practice saying the name of the young woman who shared this story, so we would make sure we said it correctly. I'm going to let you say her name first, because you say it with the most beautiful accent.
Oh, thank you. So this story comes from Jimena, who remembers her teacher, Mrs. Hogan.
And tell us how you found the correct pronunciation.
So I thought it was probably that, but I wasn't sure. So I Googled it and literally how do you say the name Jimena? And it came up with 10 or 12 different things to listen to. So I listened to several of them and they were all in agreement. And so I was good to go. And then I played it for you. So you would know that I was right, but you had already done your own research too.
Right. And then we practiced, and then we learned not only does the X make that like H sound, because it is a Mexican name, but also the middle syllable has the emphasis.
The stress.
So it's
yes.
Jimena.
Jimena. Exactly.
So Laura, will you share Jimena's story about her teacher, Mrs. Hogan?
Absolutely. I'm named after my grandmother, Jimena. Most people aren't sure how to say my name when they see it written. Every first day of school, when the teachers called the roll, I knew they would pause when they got to my name. Many of them just asked if I had a nickname. But Mrs. Hogan, my 10th grade math teacher, was determined to get it right. My teacher must have been looking over her student list in the days before school started, because she called me at home to find out how to pronounce my name correctly. I practiced with her on the phone. I remember sitting in her class on the first day, so happy, knowing that she was going to breeze through my name on the list. I know it seems like a small thing, but it meant so much to me. My name is part of my identity, and Mrs. Hogan honored that. She helped me feel known and valued.
It's such a sweet gesture.
Yes.
Because so often, I know what I do is just have them pronounce it for me.
Yes.
Like, so I'm going through the list, but imagine like you're going through the list and they don't even have to ask you like how to pronounce it. You already know.
No, wouldn't that be wonderful?
So
especially for such a complicated name. And she didn't tell us regionally where she lived, but in some places there would be no one other than those in her household who knew how to say her name.
Right. I love that. Now, I have started on my information form that I put in my Canvas before class even starts, like what do you want to be called and how do you pronounce it? And so sometimes I get a John who like on that line says, just like you'd think. But I had the most beautiful student last fall, and I'm going to try to like spell her name correctly because I don't have my list in front of me, but it was, I want to say it was, I can say it right, but I may not spell it right. It was Fakhira. And she said to me, like I would say, it rhymes with Maria, but it's Faria. And it's just so beautiful. But I'm so glad that she wrote that on her form because I don't think that intuitively I would have figured out that was the correct pronunciation. But once she said it rhymes with Maria, then we were good.
That's awesome. That's great. I find myself often when I have a complicated name or one that isn't intuitive, I write it phonetically on my roster. I always print a roster so I can make some notes, and I always write it phonetically. And that helps me then for the next week say it properly, and then I have it.
And, you know, we have Daedries and, you know, names that can be pronounced in so many different ways. Deirdre, Daedry, you know, it's just, even when it's not a name that you necessarily have to be culturally responsive to pronounce correctly, you still sometimes need that little assist from a student or family and making sure that you're calling somebody the correct name.
Yeah. And one of the things Jimena said that really struck me was, I know it seems like a small thing, but it was important to me. And I don't think that's a small thing. I think we've talked about this before. Names are so important and they're sacred. It is who you are. So it's a huge thing. And I think we should be very aware of that, especially I think in today's culture where names are not necessarily respected and some names are dismissed. The more we care about that, the more the students know they're valued.
Right. And it's not our job to give a kid a nickname.
Right.
Because we don't want to learn how to say their name correctly. I'm just going to put that out there. Like, we don't get to say, well, I'm just going to call you Peaches.
Exactly.
That's not what they choose to be called. Or, you know, sometimes the kids will quickly say, well, you can just call me, you know, Jay or whatever. But to make an effort to learn how to say someone's name does communicate that sense of value and acknowledging the importance of someone's identity. And in this case, it was her grandmother's name.
Right, which makes it even more special and more beautiful to her heart. Now we have something that coming in Florida schools that has to do with names. And my understanding is in our county, we are going to have written permission to call a student anything other than what's on the roster. So if my name on the roster is Laura and I say, oh yeah, I'm Lori, I'm not Lori until my parents sign that I'm Lori.
Wow.
So that is designed to protect us, I guess, under a new law that was passed regarding names. There are several things included in the law, but names are one of them. And it's to keep us from calling kids a name that the parents don't approve of. And but it extends even...
Let's be clear, that's about gender identity.
It is absolutely about gender identity, but it even your John, right, is
whose name is Jonathan, and he says, "Please call me John."
Exactly.
And it's so different for you guys in high school than for me in elementary, because oftentimes, you know, like on the card the parent filled out, they would put,
yes,
he goes by John.
Which then you have parent permission. Right. So that would be great.
I mean, typically in elementary, if I had a student named Austin who suddenly wanted to be called Ashley, in elementary, I would naturally have that conversation with the parent anyway.
Right.
High school, for you guys, it's such a different, handling that is different than it is for a second grader, right?
Yes. It is. And basically, it's just about respecting the student. If I respect you enough to learn how to say your name, then I respect the student sitting next to you to learn how to say their name, whatever that name is. And I have always been open to nicknames. Hey, okay, if you have a nickname, let me know. And I had a young lady one time say, I always have been wanting to be called Apple. Can you call me Apple? And I was like, sure. And I wrote it down. Like, why am I going to call her mother and say,
right?
Annie wants to be called Apple? I don't know.
Her mother would be like, her mother probably would not be surprised.
No, not at all. But I had a student, a long time ago, my first year teaching AP literature, so probably 20 years ago, who his name was Tony. And in 10th grade, he had a teacher who he didn't like, for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. And he told her, oh, yes, I know that's my name on the roster, but I actually go by Roger. My name is Roger. And she called him Roger the whole year and never questioned it. And no one on earth called the child anything but Tony ever, except that one woman. And it was his quiet rebellion against a teacher.
Which is whatever. No harm done there.
Right. And so we're taking that away from kids.
I mean, that was all that Tony had. And I'm laughing too, because sometimes we shorten or call people a shortened version of their name, and they don't like that. So I'm thinking about you, Lori, whose Laura never went by Lori. And I have a colleague, Kimberly, who does not go by Kim or Kimmy. She is Kimberly. So we can't take that liberty either. We have to ask, what do you prefer to be called? Mm-hmm. And how do I say it correctly?
Exactly.
Sometimes I was Julia, and that's not my name at all.
No, they were just adding letters to yours.
Me to be way fancier than I actually was.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I don't know why we as adults think we have a say in how a kid's name is pronounced or what a child should be called. That's just like one little piece of autonomy that they deserve. There's so many ways that kids are not autonomous, not in charge of their lives.
Their identity affirmed.
Yeah. So,
and it's an assumption, and we make so many assumptions without asking. Like, let's just, that's a great intention for all of us. I'm guilty of it too. Going into this new year, let's ask before we assume anything about a kid.
So remember when you were a kid and you used to play house? Did you used to play house where you were a mom and blah, blah, blah?
Yeah, I had an avocado green mini kitchen set. It was fabulous.
Perfect. Mm-hmm. So we always, when I would play with my cousins, we had new names. I was never, ever Laura if I was playing house.
Right.
I was always Stacy.
You were Stacy.
Stacy.
Wow, I would not have guessed that. I was Tiffany.
That's so cute.
See, I could have been a Tiffany.
You could have been a Tiffany.
I would not have thought you a Stacy, though.
I was a Stacy. And so it's like natural to try on new identities and to play with your name. And when I said, oh, my name is Stacy, my cousins were like, okay, Stacy. Nobody questioned me on that. And I went back to Laura, of course, but I don't know. I feel like it's a natural part of play and growth and learning to kind of play with names and be called what you want to be called sometimes.
Yeah. So let's ask,
Let's ask.
Let's ask before we assume what someone wants to be called. And then once they tell us, let's make an effort to affirm their identity and call them what they wish to be called, even if Tony wishes to be Roger.
Exactly. Right. But also, speaking as someone on the front lines of Florida, stay legal, friends.
Yeah,
stay legal, you know?
It's a sticky place right now.
It is.
In many states, Florida
Yes.
or North Carolina, it has some difficult
Virginia has some challenges
to navigate. So many states. I think, again, not making assumptions and asking and trying to do what's in the best interest of the kid and the family is hard, but important right now.
Right.
And I have said this to my students who are all aspiring principals. We all want the same thing. And we all have some challenges in it, but we all want this young person to move toward their potential, to be happy and healthy and have a good school experience. And I feel like we can work through some of these things, but you're right. It takes care. It takes more energy than it should right now because politicians get involved, and people's political aspirations get involved.
Right.
But we are, in terms of parents and professionals, really, when we get to the heart of it, on Team Kid. And, we have to, I think, also have a little bit of compassion, because I think there are groups of parents whose fears are being used for political gain. Because if you are a parent who doesn't completely understand the inner workings of a school, and you've entrusted your most valuable loves to teachers, and someone is telling you that teachers are trying to do something harmful to your kid, that certainly creates fear.
Very scary.
And we wish they would not make assumptions about us too, and ask. Let's all do that. Parents, professionals, let's all stop making assumptions.
Yeah. And I love that you that ground rule for your students, like we're all on the same side. We're all trying to do the same thing. So let's ask, but also let's all have that assumption about each other. I don't know a single teacher who is looking to hurt kids in any way ever. They're just not. I mean, there are bad people everywhere. So who knows? The whole country can't answer that. But I don't know a single one. I guarantee you don't know a single one. So let's make that assumption going both ways.
Of benevolence.
Yes.
And let's try to work together, and let's affirm kids the best we can,
because we're all on like Team Kid. It's Team Kid here.
Oh, I love that. It is Team Kid. Absolutely. And thank you to Jimena for highlighting that lesson for us. And thank you to you, Laura Estes-Swilly, not Lori Estes-Swilly.
Oh gosh, that was like a little nightmare.
For affirming kids and always being Team Kid. So friends, have a great start to a new school year. If you're headed back in this week or coming weeks, we're cheering you on. Please join us again next week for another episode of the Lessons That Last podcast.
Have a great week, friends. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you will subscribe to the Lessons That Last podcast wherever you listen. Give us a rating too, which will help other listeners find us. And don't forget to visit chalkandchances.com for more stories. You can also find more information on Julie's research in books. While you're there, take the quiz to find out what kind of memorable teacher you are. I took it and was surprised by what I found. I think you'll find good food for thought. Let us know about your quiz results. We hope you will meet us here each week and bring a friend to share the conversation.